Hello dear friends, welcome to Vision Pharmacy. In our today's test, we are going to study test for parenterals. So before we start with our today's video, please do like, share, subscribe and press the bell icon for getting updates on upcoming videos. Let's begin dear friends. The first test that we are going to see is the sterility test. This test is done to detect presence of viable microorganisms in order to ensure sterility of the product. The advantage for this test is it confirms microbial safety of injectables. However, it is time consuming, that is, it may require up to 14 days and requires aseptic handling. Moving to the second test, that is the Pyrogen test, which is also known as rabbit test. This test measures rise in body temperature of rabbit after injection of the parenteral product, and it is done in order to detect the pyrogens, mainly endotoxins. It is simple and specific for pyrogen. However, the disadvantage for this test is it uses animals and also it is not suitable for all formulations. Moving to the next one, that is LAL test, which is also known as Limulus amebocyte lysate. This test is in vitro test using horseshoe crab lysate, and it is used in order to detect the bacterial endotoxins. This test is rapid, sensitive, and also it does not require any animal. However, this test cannot detect non-endotoxin pyrogens. Moving to next test. The next test is particulate matter test. This test quantifies particulate contamination in parenterals, and it is done in order to ensure absence of visible and invisible particles. The advantage for particulate matter test is to ensure product clarity and safety, and it requires special instruments in order to perform this test. Moving to the next test, that is the clarity test. The clarity test is visual inspection for visible particles, and it detects physical contamination within the product. It is quick and non-destructive, which is advantage for this test. However, it is subjective and may miss small particles are the some of the disadvantages for the clarity test. Moving to the next test, that is the preservative efficacy test. So, this test is also known as PET test, and it is used to determine effectiveness of antimicrobial preservatives that are being used in the parenteral product. It ensures microbial stability over the shelf life of the product. The advantage for PET test is it validates the preservative choice. However, the disadvantage is it is time consuming and requires multiple organisms in order to perform this test. Moving to the next test. The test is extractables and leachables testing. So basically, this test is done to identify chemicals released from container or closure during storage of the product within the container. It is done with the objective to assess safety of the packaging material. The advantage for this test is it prevents toxic leachable risk of the container in the product. However, the disadvantage is it is complex and intensive analytical methods are utilized. Moving to the next one, that is pH test. So pH test measures pH of the parenteral formulations in order to ensure that formulation complies with the body fluid. It is simple and fast. However, it may not reflect long-term stability, which is the major disadvantage of pH test. Moving to the next one, that is the viscosity test. So viscosity test measures resistance to flow of the formulation, and it ensures proper flow through syringe or device. The advantage for viscosity test for parenteral include importance for injectability of dosage accuracy, whereas the disadvantage for test are it is affected by temperature and shear condition. You know that viscosity is affected by temperature and shear conditions, right? So the viscosity of product may vary at different temperatures will be the disadvantage for this test. Moving to the next one. The next test is isotonicity test. So this test is done in order to test or check out the compatibility with blood osmolarity, right? And it is done in order to ensure that no damage to blood cells or tissues will be done. Then, talking about its advantage, the osmoticity test prevents irritation or pain during injection. I mean, if the product complies with the test. However, the disadvantage includes difficult for complex formulation. Moving to the next test, that is leak test. So leak test checks integrity of sealed containers and ensures containers and closure integrity. It helps or it advantage includes prevents contamination during storage. However, the disadvantage is it may not detect micro leaks. Then the next test is accelerated stability test for parenterals. So basically here the test formulations are studied for stability under stress conditions like that of excessive heat or humidity. Then the objective is to predict shelf life of the formulation. Advantages for this test are it speed up stability data generation. However, the disadvantage is the reports or the data that is been obtained by accelerated stability testing may not perfectly replicate real-time condition, right? So this may be the disadvantage for accelerated stability testings. Moving to the next tests. The next test is reconstitution time, that is used for dry powders. So this is to determine time taken to dissolve lipophilized powders in diluent, and it ensures easy and uniformity of reconstitution. Then the advantage for this test is it provides practical parameter for hospital and clinical use. However, the disadvantage is the reconstitution time may vary with handling or with temperature. Moving to the next one, that is the weight variation test for small volume injectables. So, in this, weights are taken of filled ampules or vials to check volume consistency in order to ensure dose uniformity. It is quick and quality control tool. However, the disadvantage for this test is it's applicable only for low viscosity non-viscous formulation. Moving to the next and the last test, that is the container closure integrity test, that is CCIT. This test ensures the container system prevents ingress of contaminants, and the objective is to verify the package integrity. The advantage for this test is it is crucial for sterility assurance. However, the disadvantage is it may require special equipments in order to detect this test. So that's all students in our today's video. I hope you have understood the various tests that are being performed for testing of parenterals. Thank you for watching this video till end.